All right, everyone. So that is the end of our break. Let's all come on back, please. All right. So just to get this started, my name is Christine Diaz. I'm an environmental justice researcher and organizer with Clean Water for North Carolina. And as a refresher, so this question and answer session will be approximately 30 minutes. And thank you all for these wonderful questions in the chat. We will try to get to all of them, but no promises there. And so for our phone callers for this Zoom meeting, approximately 15 minutes into this session, you will be able to raise your hand, or you should raise your hand. And that's by pressing *9, and then we'll allow you to unmute yourselves. But we definitely have a lot to get started on. So first of all, thank you again to Belinda and Naeema for speaking about all of your experiences. I know it was really great to hear everything and all the truth telling from both of y'all. So one of the first questions that came up in the chat was, and feel free for either of you to take this question on, if Title VI is meant to prevent discrimination based on race, how is it that BIPOC communities often receive the brunt of pollution? Is it failure of enforcement? Is it bribes? What have y'all seen?
Okay, so this is Naeema, and we believe that it's both of what you name, it's all of what you name. It's a failure of enforcement at the local, state, and federal levels on these corporations. And again, we call it environmental racism, which means these things are not haphazardly happening or by chance happening, but we believe that they happen because they perceive people to not have the economic and political power to fight off these dirty industries. And of course, we've seen over the years that our elected officials do not give a darn about the people they represent. They are beholden to corporations, and we see it every day in the laws that they pass, where whenever communities stand up against these corporations, we've seen our state legislators pass laws to prevent people from being able to speak out or speak up and fight back. In the case of the hog nuisance lawsuit that I mentioned earlier, when those lawsuits were going forth, our state legislators, prompted by Smithfield, passed a bill called House Bill 467. Under House Bill 467, it stated it was the intent of that bill was to prevent communities from being able to file lawsuits against industries, whether they were industrial or forestry. Is what they specifically named. If you lived in an area where industrial agriculture was taking place or forestry work was going forward, such as the cutting down of all the trees around us for this wood pellet industry, that if you lived in those communities, you had no claim or no right to file a lawsuit against these industries, stating that these industries, were doing the business that they do, and people moved in on them, not them moving in on the people. And so they're saying that you should have known when you moved here that these kinds of things would take place. That is absolutely not the truth, because the majority of people living in these areas were already there when these industries came along. Um, People were living in these counties long before Smithfield came to town in the 1980s, was when they started coming into North Carolina, where people were already living in these communities. These are people living in these communities are living on a lot of them are living on generational property. meaning that that property was owned and lived on by them long before these industries were ever thought of. For example, we had one young lady, and most of you all may have met her, heard her talk, or speak about her community. That was Elsie Herring in Wallace, North Carolina, which is in Duplin County, and she lived on her family's property that had been in their family for over 100 years. Her grandfather purchased that property as a free slaveman and distributed the property amongst her family. And the pork industry came in. Not only did they move in on them, but they took some of her land and they went to the register of deeds office and they changed the map and deed to her grandfather's property. And once they changed it at the courthouse, then they went out to the property and physically took the land. And she died fighting to get her family's property cleared out of that situation. And so these are again generational property that these things are locating themselves on. We know that when we look at the wood pellet industry and we look at Robeson County, people were living there long before the pellet industry came along. But that made no difference to these corporations. They just went in and set up shop. Northampton County the same way. Every county you name, people were already there when these industries came along. And so it is not by haphazard uh, meaning that these industries are there, but these communities were targeted because they perceive people not to have the economic or political power to fight them off. And our legislators have proven that. Like I was saying, House Bill 467 stated that people living in these communities had no right to file a lawsuit against these industries under the claim that these industries were there first. Um, and that, so given that they had no right to be filing these lawsuits, they should have known when they moved there that this was going to happen. Um, and we know that to be a lie, an outright lie. Um, and so, again, as Belinda stated earlier, just understanding what our rights are, knowing what your rights are, and not being afraid to fight for those rights, can make a difference. It don't always make a difference, but it can make a difference. And then so under 467, they were trying to stop these lawsuits from going forward. And they also, not only did they pass this bill to try to prevent people from being able to sue these industries, but they're saying if you sue, you can only sue for property value and you can't sue for all the other nuances that is created for you, like a change in your way of life, your denial of clean air, clean water, the effects that it's had on your health, all these things that you have experienced from this shouldn't make a difference. That these industries should be able to do what they're doing without people interfering. And they also tried to do a retroactive clause, which made it very obvious that they only filed this lawsuit to try to protect the pork industry when they said under for the retroactive clause they wanted them to include the current nuisance lawsuits that were already going forward, that we need to stop these lawsuits from going forward, and the way to do that is to include them in this passing of this bill, that not only can you file any new lawsuits, but the old ones that you're already filing can be null and void if we can get it included in this passing of this law. Well, they were defeated in that we didn't defeat the bill, but we defeated the retroactive clause, which was a big victory for the communities. And so this was in 2016 that they filed House Bill 467. And then, as if that wasn't good enough, in 2017 they came back and filed Senate Bill 711. Under Senate Bill 711, it stated very clearly that you could not, that communities could not file lawsuits, that the people could not file lawsuits against the pork industry at all for any reason. And that bill got passed as well. And it was very clear that these two bills were only meant to protect the corporations and had nothing to do with the people that lived in these communities being harmed. And these were representatives that represent the people living in these communities that were only sitting in the seats that they were sitting in because the people in these communities voted them into office. And, so that was just, it was just, I don't know what to call it. It was just, I get mind boggled every time I talk about it. And not only mind boggled, I get pissed off too. And again, it just shows us that we need to clean out that state house because they have no interest of the people at heart. And Belinda, do you want to add anything? I'll be quiet for a minute because I go on and on.
No, we'll go on to the next question, Christine.
Okay, that's fine. Well, sort of related. Obviously, you were just talking about hog and how the hog industry is really protected. But in terms of other sort of environmental justice struggles in polluting industries, are there any efforts to expand Title VI to include low-income communities or a rural status of a community instead of just the, I think, race, color, national origin that Veronica mentioned in the introduction?
You said, is there any to include low income communities?
Yes. Like, is there any efforts to expand Title VI to include those different classes instead of just what exists right now?
Well, I haven't heard of any, but that's just me. If anybody on this, because we have Will Hendricks, who might could speak to that, Sherry White as well. But to my knowledge, there's not been any moves to that means, and I'm not sure that there would be, given the nature of Title VI, which is, at the current time, specifically saying to protect communities, low-income communities of color, which has been throughout the history of environmental injustice, all throughout this country. All the communities that we talk about look the same. When we start talking about dumping on people, the communities look the same all around this country. Well, when if we think back on this incident with Tennessee when they had that the large coal ash spill, they cleaned it up, and what did they do with it? They took it to Alabama and they dumped it on these black communities there, and it's like whenever we talk about environmental injustice, if you really look at the pictures and show the faces of the people being affected, it is predominantly people of color. There are low income white communities that suffer these issues, but I can tell you from experience, and most of us on here, if we acknowledge it, will can see that low income white people always vote against their interests. That's the result of white privilege. White privilege says that just because of the color of my skin, I deserve certain kinds of actions and protections and behaviors. And you have low income people that really buy into that, which really believe just because my skin is white, I don't suffer the same as them poor little black people over there. And you will hear those kinds of statements if we want to be honest about it. And so we've tried to include low income white communities. They don't always respond, or they feel like, well, it doesn't affect me the same way. You will hear those kinds of statements. It doesn't affect me the same way, or that's my friend. or that's my cousin, or there's some connection that they feel to a kindred spirit to these people, different from what people of color feel about these dirty industries doing the dumping that they do. And so until we can get, you know, these low income white communities to understand that these people don't give a darn any more about them than they do the people of color. And, then that's a battle that we still have to fight. And if anybody else want to add something to that, please do. That's the way I see it, okay? And that's been my experience over the years. Another example of that is in this hog fight. Um, I've gone into white communities and talked with people, sat down in their homes with them, interviewed them, and um, listen to them talk about how they feel, what is the impact of them on them from this industry, and they have named the same things that Black people I talk with have named, Latinx people have named, and the indigenous population have named, but then they'll say, "But those are my friends. We went to school together. We grew up together. We ate at the same table together. We did A, B, C, and D together." And so they feel like for those reasons, they shouldn't be complaining or saying anything against them. And they also, I had one lady who was a state representative, Sydney Watson, who was our a state representative for Duplin County back in the early 90s when she went up against the industry trying to represent the people that had put her into office, going with them to health board meetings, attending meetings where they were speaking out against this industry. The industry went after her, and they spent $2 million to get her unseated and she wound up losing the next election. And in 1994, she was voted out as a state representative because the industry spent all this money to get rid of her because she was addressing their behavior along with the citizens that she represented. And I interviewed her, and she talked about how the industry treated her, how they was showing up in front of her home, walking across her yard with sticks and guns, trying to intimidate her. And she nearly had a nervous breakdown from the way they treated her. And she was saying how these were people that she knew, people that she had grown up with, that she had even worked in the state house with, and she did not expect that kind of behavior from them. So we're talking about some vicious people when we talk about these corporations that they would stop at nothing to protect their ways and to be able to do what they do. Um, and there are stories out there where people can vouch for what I'm saying. And it's nothing that I'm making up. These are things that I've heard out of the mouths of the people that suffer. Had another man I talked with. He was a white man living in Duplin County, and he was living out on this massive land base. And he said one day he walked outside, he started seeing the hog houses coming. Next thing he know, there were 21 hog houses right around where he lived. And he wrote letters to the industry, about what was happening and asking them not to do what they were doing. Because he said he felt that because he knew them and that they had grown up together and he had went to school with them, did all these different things, that he could talk to them. Well, when he began to complain, they did not waste time harassing him and threatening him. And that's been the behavior of the industry. I remember when I first started working on this hog problem and listening to the stories, I was thinking to myself, they sound like the mafia. The way the mafia treated people, well, that's the way the pork industry was treating people. And so they stop at nothing to protect their behavior.
Thank you. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to sort of move on to a sort of wrap up question, but just for everyone who's asking about what they can do and all these resources, we will be sending out a wraparound message that includes a lot of different resources, including there is an upcoming in Viva hearing for the Sampson facility for their first time Title V permit. You can attend that virtually. But all of those resources and that information will be coming to you all. But something, so with both of y'all, you know, you've had so many experiences fighting and continuing to fight against these polluting industries and corporations that are interested in profit over people. And I think that in itself is really an environmental racism, environmental injustice, social injustice. Really, so I want to hear from both of you how you don't get discouraged from all of these fights and working for so long, having some mixed results.
Well, let me start by saying, sometimes you do get discouraged, but you can't give up. And I think about our forefathers, our parents, you know, people that got out and fought for us. Had they not fought for us, we wouldn't be where we are. So, you know, at the point in time, you have to take that torch and carry it on. And right now, what I'm trying to do is talk to some younger people. I'm 68 and, you know, I'm still fighting. I still have a lot of fight in me, but I would like to basically try to recruit people that care about the environment and care about their communities, and not see people just come in and take over because they feel like they have that right to do that. So even with getting discouraged, it was like, you know, and I use the pipeline for an example. Everybody was, oh, you all can't fight the pipeline. They got too much money. You all can't do this. You all can't do that, you know. But naysayers, you're going to have a lot of naysayers. And if you listen to what people say, you know, a lot of stuff wouldn't get done because you're listening to this negative of saying what you can't do. I've always been taught by my mom. She said, you know, say what you mean what you say. Stand for what you believe and don't let anybody tell you that you're wrong. Mm-hmm. And so I try to instill that in my two girls is, you know, stand for what you believe. And if you're wrong, say you're wrong. But if you're right, don't let anybody tell you that you're not, and keep standing. And eventually, you know, just like with the pipeline, it took 6 years, you know, and nobody thought it could be done. But look what happened. So if we had, you know, even got discouraged and gave up, it wouldn't have happened. So even sometime when you get a little tired, you just kind of sit back and regroup and think things over, and that will give you that extra push to say, they're not going to stop me. I'm going to do what I need to do, you know, and that's how I've perseverance and to continue as the Lord give me the strength and the power to do so, is to do what I'm doing right now, is to keep fighting, keep standing, and not let anybody tell me that I can't do what I'm trying to do.
And I would agree with Belinda, you know, and every day as I'm working, I think about, well, you know, we have got to recruit some young people because most of us is out here are aging out in terms of how much longer we going to be around to fight the battles that we've been fighting. You know, Belinda says she's 68. I turned 70 on my last birthday. But, you know, that has not stopped me from, you know, wanting to do the work that I do, to encourage people to take a stand, to make their voices heard, to, you know, address the issues and understand what's happening around them, understand how this stuff get to us by looking at what your local governments are doing. A lot of these things come into our communities because we have local governments that really don't have a clue what economic development really is. And I always say to people, if economic development is not taking on industry that's going to leave everybody in your community sick, that is not economic development. And so helping people to understand, what they should pay attention to in terms of how stuff get to them, and being able to get in front of something instead of always being behind it, because it's easier to stop something than it is to change it. And so we have got to instill that message everywhere we go. It's easier to stop something than it is to change it. So we can prevent these things uh, from at the start out, then we wouldn't have these long battles to fight. And so, hopefully one day soon we'll all get in front instead of always coming up in the back at the back end. And we'll be able to change some of these things if we can get in front of them.
All right. Thank you so much, both of you. Oh, sorry, Belinda, did you have
something? No, I was just, I had the privilege earlier this year to speak to a group of students, Courtney Wood students from Gillian School of Global Health, Public Health at UNC Chapel Hill. And, North Carolina always say that, public input. And I'm looking at the states because I asked them to research states that allowed public input into their permitting process. And we have so many states that are doing that. And, I look at North Carolina and I see why we are a dumping ground because, a lot of states now are not permitting things to come in and they know that they can't go in there. So, okay, we can go to North Carolina. They don't have any laws. They don't, let the impacted people have a voice in what's coming or the permitting process. And that's why we have what we have. And I'm like, Naeema, it is time to start at the State House and come on down to the local house, because until we do that, we're going to get the same thing. My pastor always said, if you always do what you always done, you always get what you always got. And that's why we're getting what we're getting, because we have nobody in Raleigh that are, standing up and fighting and saying, okay, just like not in my backyard is okay if it's not in their backyard, but then, put it in mine, because the majority of the people that I look at in Viva, look at up in Bethesda, Maryland, that office complex they have. I mean, it's mega. It looks like a luxury apartment building or some sky rise. They're profiting, but they don't live here in Northampton County, and they're happy with the ships going overseas. And then the people over there, I was on a call last week with people from Iconia, British Columbia, the UK, London, where they're paying these subsidy taxes because it's added into their light bills and they have no other choice, but they're not profiting from it. So, like I said, again, profit over people. We need somebody that's going to stand up and stop selling us out for something that, we're not going to benefit from at all. And they talk about economic development, and that word needs to be put out of the dictionary altogether, because it's just a word, economic development, and that's how they soup the people up. When the pipeline was being or supposedly being built, we had the mayor of Gettysburg on TV doing a commercial. It's going to bring jobs. It's going to bring this. It's going to bring that. And when we would go out, I had a young lady that was coming from Chapel Hill. She was doing her thesis, and she was an art major. So she would come out and take pictures, and I would go with her to keep her from going by herself. And every truck, every vehicle you saw had out-of-state license on it. You didn't see North Carolina license plates. You saw out-of-town license plates. And then when Grisp came and did an article, and we were going out, Daniel, and we were going out taking pictures. And we were right there in Gettysburg, and it was some Mexican. They were working, and they were working. And they were speaking Spanish, but they didn't realize that Daniel knew how to speak Spanish. And when he started communicating back with them, I mean, I felt bad for them because they actually froze. And the first thing they wanted to know was, this going to be on TV? Is this going to be in the paper? And he was like, no, we're just doing this for an article. And, I'm not going to take your pictures, but, this is what was going on. But yet instead they said economic development. They didn't walk up and down Highway 301 where the impacted community was and asked anybody, did they want a job on the pipeline? They were just there. So, that's how it happens. So that word economic development is a false hope. I mean, that's what they use to lure people in and think that they're going to bring all this job and all this money, and it's not going to happen. So I'm going to jump off in a minute or two. But thank you all for listening. I hope I said something that would help someone. If you have any questions, Christine, somebody would get them to me. And like I say, all the people that have been here and been to Northampton County and helped me in what I was doing, again, I appreciate you wholeheartedly. And any time that I can be of any service, please just holler. Y'all have a blessed weekend. And if the Lord said the same, we'll talk again.
All right. Thank you so much, Belinda.
Same to you, Belinda.
That was wonderful, everyone. Zoom applause. Yay. All right. I'm going to hand it over to Veronica.